Mary Catherine Ham is kicking off today's show. She is the host of Getting Hammered. She's the host of Normally. She is my friend. She is a Fox News contributor. But, Mary Catherine, you surprised me yesterday with your Getting Hammered, and you almost made me stumble on the trundle path because out of nowhere you're interviewing Sarah Isker, and I am interviewing Sarah Isker today in the third hour. And I never listen to interviews of authors when I've read their book because that will get into my head and I'll be interviewing them about the interview they did. So you need to have a warning label.
I should. It did say bonus, right? So it's not a traditional episode. But yes, I should have personally texted one of our devoted fans.
And just say, you're probably going to talk to Sarah because it's a book about the Supreme Court. I really do recommend it to you. I can't wait to talk to her about Last Branch Standing because she's very funny. And most court books are not funny at all. Even the justices, when they write a book, you might get a little tiny joke out of Amy Coney Barrett or Stephen Breyer, but they're not like giggle fests.
Yeah, no, she's a very gifted writer and a gifted speaker, and she's a lot of fun to listen to. She'll be fun on your show as well. And she brings out the fun and the fun facts and the good times on the Supreme Court history. So I enjoyed it very much as well.
Mrs. Scalia's meatballs. So let me ask you this, Mary Catherine. I asked Sarah in my outline here, what does she want to do when she grows up? And I really have no idea. And I want to ask you the same thing. What do you want to do when you grow up? You've done everything. Sarah's done everything. Do you have a plan?
I don't have a plan because the plan is mostly to make sure that my kids get on the right path of some kind in this new world that we're building. So I think to the extent that I work and I really enjoy my work and I'm working for things that I believe will make the country better for them, I also am working to educate them so that they can continue to have good lives and to have faith in their lives. And that's mostly my focus. Do I think maybe I have another book in me? Sure, but writing is hard, Hugh.
Oh, I'm not doing it again. The return on investment's not worth it. But you've got 15 years left in the house parenting. You never stop being a parent. Great story about Sandra Day O'Connor is that she would hang up the phone and her secretary would always hear her say, it never ends. And her three boys were in their 40s. It never ends. So parenting never ends, but they're out of the house in another 15 years. What do you imagine the after is?
Well, I need to learn to garden. I've never been good at that. My mom has taken that up in her retirement, so I will consider that. And I would like to learn to play the guitar. There you go, Hugh.
Oh, there you go. Okay, well, now I know. Now let's go to the serious stuff, the war. Headline in the Wall Street Journal, Iran's shadow fleet meets its match in the U.S. blockade. What a surprise. The United States Navy can overtake and stop aging tankers that are acting illegally. We've been doing that since the 1990s. What do you think the end game is here, Mary Catherine?
You're never sure with Trump, but I think I was listening to Sheehy give a bit of a lecture on how all these things are connected, Venezuela and Iran, and sort of taking out a status quo world order that made China very happy because it was getting cheap oil. And right now in this conflict, obviously we're changing the game once again. And, I was a little worried during the ceasefire that never happened that Trump would not resume any sort of aggression. But it seems like economically he's perfectly willing to do that and militarily by doing this blocking. I also think it's interesting both in Lebanon and in the Strait of Hormuz. It's the sort of international law fans tell us, oh, it's so aggressive what we're doing. We're blockading. And it's well, this is the Navy's job. This is what the U.S. military does, is keep these shipping lanes open. This is how it should be. Same with Lebanon, where it's Israel's firing into southern Lebanon and trying to get Hezbollah out. Hezbollah was supposed to be out in north of the Litani in 2006. These are things that should already have existed and order of the world that should have existed. And the international law fans just suddenly turn a blind eye to it as long as it's Iran making the damage. And I find it. And then when America asserts itself, they're ew, we don't like that. And I'm fine with it.
Now, this is the most stunning thing I've heard this week. John Podhoretz, not a fan of Donald Trump. All right, fair to say. Critic of Donald Trump, but When he gets a win, he notes the win. John's an
Yeah.
umpire. He's calling balls and strikes. John said yesterday, and I really sat up when I heard him say this on the commentary pod, 40% of America would rather see America lose the war than Donald Trump win a war conclusively. And I had to listen to it twice, and that's what he said, and I am assuming he's basing that on good research. 40% of America would rather have us lose a war than have Donald Trump win one. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that may be true. I don't know the exact numbers, but I think it's compounded by the fact that not only do many people dislike Donald Trump, but they dislike the display of American capabilities. They do not like the use of American might. That's why many of our brethren in this city were happy to watch Obama give Iran whatever they wanted for negotiations. They don't want the alternative. They do not want a world order established and continued by American military superiority, or by the way, our cultural or economic superiority. They don't like the idea of that. They have been educated for 2 generations now, many of them, that none of those things are real, that in fact all of our superiorities are bad, that they make us bad, and that enforcing any of that makes us bad, and that we have bad intentions. And so I think the combination is pretty bad for support for a war effort, combined with, and this one is fair, 20 years of the war on terror made people quite war weary, and I think that's how J.D. Vance comes by his more restrainer takes, honestly, because he was involved in that.
All right, now, Iran is, I think, without debatable points to be made in their favor, the equal of any evil regime on the planet. They just gunned down 35,000 of their own people, and that's the low-end estimate. And I know I get people on X, give me the proof, give me the proof. I'll go with the human rights groups. 35,000 minimum. That's a horrific massacre. They're evil, evil, evil people. It's not a democracy. It's a theocracy. And do we have the Marco Rubio
These people are lunatics. They are insane. They are religious zealots who can never be allowed to possess.
I want Mary Catherine to hear it from the beginning.
These people are lunatics. They are insane. They are religious zealots who can never be allowed to possess a nuclear weapon because they have an apocalyptic vision of the future. And all of their neighbors know that, by the way, which is why all of their neighbors have been supportive of the efforts we're conducting.
So, Mary Catherine, I think that's the strategic win of this campaign, is getting Marco Rubio to speak that bluntly about that regime.
Look, and I think the Arab states are seeing it. The Gulf states are seeing it. The Lebanon government, not Hezbollah, is talking to Israel openly about, like, okay, how do we get these guys out of here? That normalization, those alignments, is pretty remarkable just on its face, even if you take away the military successes that have been many of this campaign. And I think it's largely being overlooked. But he spoke bluntly, and I was also glad to see Vance speak bluntly when he came out of his 21 hours with the Iranians, instead of doing Georgetown Foreign Service School thing where you go all productive talks and also we're going to figure out what else we can give them to get them to sign on the line. He said these people are being intransigent. This is who they are. And so I think if you can't recognize that defanging that regime at the very least could be a look toward a better world order, I think, you might be preoccupied with your hatred of Trump and other things.
Now, what are your minimum red lines for winning? And I'll tell you mine up front. We have to have the Strait open, and they can't be sending their fast boats out to harass us. They can't be dropping mines. Number two, they have to give us their uranium. Those are my 2 red lines. What are yours?
Those sound very reasonable. I'm not sure how the uranium comes about, I guess, because that's the very buried stuff, correct? So that sounds like
a very buried stuff, yes.
A whole operation. And I do take heart in the fact that the kneecapping such that it has been thus far would make it extremely expensive and extremely hard for them to do much of anything with that. But yes, I think those are two basics. The part where what I fear is that many in this country and many in the media will need Iran to concede its loss, and it's never going to do that because, as Rubio said, they're lunatics. This is what they're doing.
They're lunatics. They're never going to say we lost. They're going to be like Joe Frazier on the canvas saying, or no, at Rocky, there isn't going to be a rematch. Apollo Creed, there isn't going to be a rematch. Mary Catherine Ham, you've got a brand new Getting Hammered out there with Sarah Flores on Last Branch Standing. I recommend it to everybody who doesn't want to interview Sarah themselves. So go and get that, and I'll talk to you again next week. I'm joined now by Noah Rothman, senior writer for National Review. Noah, in yesterday's segment with Rich Lowry, I demanded that you get 3 times your allocation of time on the editor's podcast because you're the only person who's right about the war.
That's very generous of you. I saw that segment, actually. I thought Rich was very reasonable. I didn't have any disagreement with him there. We do have some disagreements on the editor's podcast, but that's what makes for a good show, right?
Yes, and they're informed disagreements. Now, bottom lining it, what's a win? A clear, decisive, absolutely no one can argue with it win for Donald Trump.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that from the American strategic perspective, our objective, which is not necessarily Jerusalem's objective, is the surrender of this 900 pounds of highly enriched uranium. And that can happen any number of ways. The foremost, most advantageous way would be voluntary surrender in a negotiated settlement. And it would be a negotiated settlement. It would include some concessions from us, hopefully not significant concessions, but likely sanctions relief. Nevertheless, I'm not concerned with that suggesting that we've somehow lost the advantage in this war. Unlike John Podhoretz, who I admire and I share his concern about the continuation of this regime, the threat posed by this regime will not abate so long as it exists. But I am not completely unfavorable to the prospect of regime change slowly over the course of structural reforms. I'd love to see a gigantic collapse of this regime. It would provide a big dramatic period on this war. But it's not necessarily something we have a lot of historical parallels for. And we can see the prospect of working to undermine this regime in phase 3, which nobody has sworn off phase 3 of this regime, which is fomenting resistance from within, rebellion from within. That can happen alongside the regime providing concessions to us in the form of A, the surrender of this nuclear material, and B, the decimation of its capacity to disrupt the strait. And I don't think that can be a negotiated agreement. I think that has to be under duress. It has to be done with the American military assets in the strait, imposing our will on the Iranian forces and the Iranian forces being unable to respond. I think those 2 conditions have to be met in order for it to be an unqualified success. Still kind of a high bar, but it's eminently foreseeable that those 2 things can happen.
Now, one of the alleged red lines we laid down in Islamabad was no enrichment for 20 years, which is fine by me because that's like saying, I insist on being eligible for the NFL draft in 2 weeks. I insist on it. And they can give me that. I'm not going to be drafted. They're not going to be enriching in 20 years because it's a long time for that regime to limp along. Does that bother you? Any kind of a 20-year out there enrichment? Because the JCPOA people will say, oh, that's just what we did. And it's not.
It's not, but it does bother me. I don't want this administration to relax its standard, which has been very consistent even from the first term. No domestic enrichment capability. None. Zero whatsoever. And no desire to create that, to restore that, build up some sort of a cascading centrifuge array in an undeclared site. Very hard to do this. I mean, this activity is the sort of thing you can literally see from space. It's very expensive, very time-consuming, and requires a lot of technical expertise. And many of the individuals who have that expertise are no longer on this earth inside Iran. So I am concerned about the principle that we would be ceding in that agreement, not necessarily Iran's capacity to make good on it. But I just don't think we should be even giving legitimacy to the notion that Iran has a weapons-grade capacity enrichment capability domestically. No other state in the world that has a nuclear program needs that. And we've offered, counter to this reporting, which I find very suspect, we've offered to give them low-enriched uranium for medical uses, as other nations in the world have. There's no reason for them to have a weapons-grade program, and we should not allow them to have that, not countenance its existence.
So that's not part of a complete win. We'll return when the deal details actually come out. How about their rocket program? I don't want them to have any rockets. No one needs rockets. You can have a conventional Artesh. You can defend yourself against, you can have tanks and airplanes and things, but you don't need intercontinental ballistic missiles. Agreed?
No, agreed. And they've proven that they cannot have that because they fired a 2-stage rocket at Diego Garcia. There's no nation on earth that needs a conventional multi-stage ballistic missile program unless you're a spacefaring nation. And yeah, you want to put satellites into space. Sure, sure. You can have access to all the communications and navigation technology you want, Iran, but you can't have a multi-stage ballistic missile program. The only reason why a country would have a multi-stage ballistic missile program is if they wanted to deliver a nuclear weapon in a long-range distance. There's no other reason to have a conventional two-stage ballistic missile program, again, unless you're a spacefaring nation, and Iran has forfeited its capacity to have that. So no. No long-range ballistic missiles either.
You were agreed. Last thing is, and I don't know enough about sanctions relief to say when and what ought to be eased on whom. However, they're going to need some money soon because they're bankrupt. I saw the report from Iran International yesterday with the Iranian central bank predicting it will take 12 years to rebuild, and we're going to have 180% inflation next year. So they're screwed. At what point do we begin to throttle back the sanctions?
I hope not soon, and I'm actually a little nervous about all this talk about returning to Islamabad as quickly as we are. We need this blockade strategy to bite a little bit more. They have to be deprived of revenue. The IRGC has to be starved. The proxies have to be starved. The propaganda has to shut down. And the oil revenues have to dry up, and oil production has to dry up. I've seen estimates 13 days, 16 days, at which point storage inside Iran is maxed out and they have to start shutting down these fields, which, as we've learned over the course of this conflict, not so easy to start them back up, and a lot of damage can be done to them in the interim. So what we want is Iranian regime's pillars of stability inside this regime, and the RGC in particular, which uses this revenue to fund its operations, to dry up in certain sectors. When Israel and the United States hit, for example, steel, big industry inside Iran, and certain elements inside the IRGC derive their profits from it. They all have little fiefdoms. So we want some fiefdoms to be okay, and other fiefdoms to not be so okay, so that we have existential conflict within the regime and we begin to see fractures within it while these two forces jockey for power. And then once you have internal elite disagreement, you can start to see those fractures emerge and form into something much more durable that we can exploit. So we want time. We want this to work a little bit more.
So, last question, Noah. Is anyone who isn't blinded or impacted by TDS going to be able to claim that this isn't a giant win for Donald Trump?
Yeah, they will. I mean, listen, a lot of my colleagues, none of whom are suffering from classic late stage Trump derangement syndrome, are very skeptical of this war and very skeptical of the prospects for success. And I take all of their criticisms and apprehensions at face value. I don't think they're coming from some surreptitious place where they're advancing another narrative on the back of their anxiety over this war. I think a lot of people are. I think a lot of people are retailing Trump, if not TDS, then Trump frustrations, hostility, hatred, through their criticisms of this war, but they're not. A lot of people are very concerned about the economic trajectory of this war, and they don't think the president has been clear about his objectives and the means to get there. I think those criticisms are perfectly valid. I don't necessarily share them, but they're valid.
Okay, valid is different from being crazy, and I'm more concerned with the crazy people. There are no crazy people on the editors. They're just wrong. Noah, you are right. Hang in there. Go the distance. Demand equal time. Thank you, Noah C. Rothman. The United States is winning this war decisively with its ally, Israel. I had a chance to talk about that a little bit last night on Special Report on the panel with Brett Baer, Annie Linsky, and Juan Williams. Here's cut number one.
Hugh, what do you make of the blockade? It seems like we're heading towards another sit-down with Iran in coming days.
That's what President Trump signaled today, that he expects more talks to occur. I think the blockade was the necessary next step. It's ordered in sequence. The kinetic military strike on the ability to produce the weapons that could harm our military. Now grab them by their fiscal throat and cut them down. I would direct everyone, if they read Iran International, a report has leaked today that the Iranian Central Bank has warned the government it will take 12 years to recover, and they're facing 180% inflation inside of Iran. The hammers come down on Iran, and I think they're crumbling.
180%?
Yes.
That beats our CPI.
Quite a lot. We are at 3.3%. I feel bad for the people of Iran. They are not our enemies. It's the regime. Brett came around again, and the JCPOA was on the table. Cut number two.
But Hugh, that JCPOA, the problem was enforcement and actually making sure that the Iranians lived up to their end of the deal. And we found out over time that they didn't.
We could take all hour to talk about the problems with the JCPOA, Brett. It was the worst diplomatic deal in history, but the president will not agree to that. He is going to demand an on-time, anywhere inspection regime. I think he must get back the highly enriched uranium, either through the IEA or through some consortium. What Juan mentions is true, but the reality is we don't care what the Chinese think. We don't care what our NATO partners think. I'm very certain he doesn't really care what the Pope thinks right now. Donald Trump cares about bringing Iran to heel and maybe getting freedom to 92 million Iranians. And that's what I think the Pope and the other people ought to be cared about too. And then we got to talk about reconciliation and the budget and what's going on the Hill, cut number 3.
The reconciliation, it seems like, Hugh, they're going to try to pack a lot in there.
I hope they do, Brett. Senator Schumer seems intent on keeping the Republicans competitive in the fall by standing in the way of the SAVE Act, standing in the way of DHS funding. And I think reconciliation, though difficult, will make it possible to reopen the government, get everything done on the agenda, and they need to get FISA done. That's the one thing that must be done. We can't go blind.
Well,
We stayed on FISA. That's the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. One had just finished saying that they want to add warrant requirements. I did FISA warrants from 1984 to 85 for 2 attorney generals, so I said this in response, cut number 4.
Hugh,
I'd implore Senator Kennedy to go look at some of the warrants. I did FISA warrants for 2 attorney generals in the 80s. We have thousands of malicious, malevolent actors in the United States who are not American citizens. We have to keep track of them. You lose one of them, you'll lose lots of American lives. That's that simple. We need FISA, and I hope Republicans are listening. Hope you're listening to Relief Factor. I got my 6 miles in today. It's turned warm inside the Beltway, and I'm very pleased that I was trundling for my 6. I'm very pleased because it turned warm. But Relief Factor is what you need. I cannot get my arm fixed, but I got no aches and pains. I've done something in my arm, and it's going to take a while to figure out what it is, but it's not Relief Factor area. That's the minor aches and pains that come with exercise and aging. If you do 6 miles, you might feel it a little bit the next day unless you're taking your Relief Factor, as I'm about to do. If you're watching on the Salem News Channel, it's this simple. If you're listening on the Salem Radio Network, I hope you heard me take it. If you're listening on one of my radio affiliates across the United States, I hope you heard me take it. I especially hope, I want to talk about my new affiliate down in North Carolina, in Hickory, North Carolina, but I want to make sure I get the call letters right, and I don't think it's on my my sheet. Not on my sheet. Yes, it is. WHKY Talk Radio, 1290 AM. 102.3 FM in Hickory, North Carolina. Watch us on the Salem News Channel. If you're on Samsung 1177, we're on Amazon Prime, we're on Pluto TV, we're everywhere. And you can listen to us all the time on HughHewitt.com. You can get the podcast at iTunes, at Apple, at Spotify, at Salem Podcast Network. Just be smart and listen to us, and make sure you patronize the people that support us, like Relief Factor. Relief Factor really does work. I tell everyone about it, and some people believe me and some people don't. But I don't take anything for 13 and a half years unless it works. And I want to go a lot longer. My grandkids are young. I want to be around to see them graduate and maybe get married. And the youngest one of them is in the womb still. So I got to go a long way. I got to stay in shape, so I got to exercise. And the only way to do that and do that feeling good is to make sure that you get what your body needs. The only supplement I have taken in more than 20 years is Relief Factor. 1-800, the number 4, and the word relief, $19.95, 3-week starter pack. And you can find that starter pack, less than $1 a day, at relieffactor.com, relieffactor.com. Sarah C. Bedford of the Washington Examiner joins me. Sarah is their chief political investigations reporter. She knows the Hill like very few people do. Sarah, what is the prospect for reconciliation and what is going to be in it? That is the process by which simple majorities in the House and the Senate can pass a bill.
That's right. And I think the prospects of something getting done this year are good, but beyond that, there's not a lot of clarity. And even one reconciliation bill is going to be a challenge for Republicans. So when you hear optimistic talk from some Republicans about doing maybe two reconciliation bills or possibly even three reconciliation bills, that is going to be such an uphill battle because with the margin so small, especially in the House, but also in the Senate, but particularly in the House, pretty much every Republican member gets to hold an enormous amount of sway over what goes in the reconciliation bill. It's kind of ironic, but like Speaker Mike Johnson would have a much easier time getting this through if he had bigger margins, but everybody gets to be sort of a kingmaker. And so Mike Johnson's going to have a really hard time if some of those hardline Republicans in the House start making demands like put parts of the SAVE Act, for example, in a reconciliation bill, put a gas tax holiday in the reconciliation bill, all of these other ideas. It's going to be a real challenge.
Sarah, I am most interested, and this is my Hugh Hewitt view. I'd like to get DHS open and funded. I would like the entire government funded through the end of the Trump presidency so we don't have any of this absurdity. And I would like to get the defense supplemental done and the shipbuilding budget passed. That's simple. Everybody wins because the defense industrial base is spread across the United States. Is it really that hard to put that together and move it through?
Yes, it's sort of simple in theory, right? But because there's a sense as we get closer and closer to the midterms, Republican primaries, or even closer than that, members recognize that this one reconciliation bill that has the DHS funding in it might be the only train leaving the station. And so there are not a lot of Republicans who have specific asks that are going to be willing to let that train leave the station without at least trying to get their goods on board, recognizing that a second or third reconciliation bill is not guaranteed. So you're going to have Republicans probably object to the idea of just doing DHS funding if they see a chance to try to get that their only chance potentially to try to get their wish list funded.
DHS and DOD. That's what I'm saying. DHS, DOD, and whatever else they think the Democrats might screw with it. Because impeachment's coming, and that's going to, if the House is flipped, and it's likely to flip, and the Senate's in danger, they got to get done what they got to get done, and the most important thing is the nation's defense. Tell me among Republicans you talk to, I think the war has been won, and I think Donald Trump's not making it up. I mean, we got to tie the bow and agree on terms, but they've smashed the Iranian military. Do the Republicans act like winners?
There's cautious optimism. I think, like you mentioned, that bow hasn't quite been tied yet. And until that happens, Republicans are really reluctant to be seen as taking a victory lap or have some sort of mission accomplished moment when that's not technically the case yet. But there's definitely cautious optimism that this could be the end. The markets are certainly reacting that way. Trump seems to potentially have some cooperation from Gulf state nations to put the financial screws to Iran. So things seem to be lining up for Donald Trump's strategy here. But again, until the T's are crossed, the I's are dotted, you're not going to see Republicans out there cheering just quite yet.
Now, the next thing that comes up will be how quickly gas prices decline, and that could take 3 or 4 months. We're in the summer driving season, so that's a demand push. But Cuba comes up, and I read stories yesterday about how Diaz-Canel is out and someone named Castro's coming in. There are 3 or 4 pretenders to the throne. What's your buzz on Cuba?
Well, I know what Republicans on Capitol Hill would say about this is please just cool it on the foreign policy front, right? They want Donald Trump and the Trump administration to pivot to an affordability message. They want him to sort of put some muscle behind their last chance to get a legislative accomplishment that they can run on. They want him to be talking about, look, I feel your pain at the pump. I know you can't buy a house, your first home if you're a young person, all these things that he ran on. So I do think that there would be some heartburn in the GOP if Donald Trump pivoted from even a clean victory in Iran to another foreign policy adventure. That's just not what Republicans in Washington want to see from the president right now.
All right, so last question. Scott Bessent today said 1 out of 3 taxpayers or 1 out of 2 taxpayers are claiming one of the working class tax credit provisions to their advantage. Is that message getting out?
Well, certainly some Americans are going to see that when they get their refunds. I mean, there's always a risk that the Trump administration inflates expectations about refunds. And if they don't come in quite as high as Americans are hoping because of that messaging, it could backfire. But it is just objective fact that the Trump administration's policies, either from the One Big Beautiful Bill or from, earlier legislation from even the first Trump administration, those policies are putting more money back in Americans' pockets. But the question is, can Trump pull the focus away from things like the Iran war and spend time driving that message home?
All right, so I've got Sarah Isker coming up in hour number 3 to talk about her book, Last Branch Standing. What is the buzz on Supreme Court retirements, if any, that you've heard?
There's certainly some buzz about Justice Alito that he could retire at the end of this term, which is in June, because of that risk that you mentioned, the very real risk that Republicans could lose control of the Senate, or their margins could be trimmed significantly in the midterms. If Alito were to retire at the end of the term, there's precedent for being able to turn around a new confirmation in that amount of time. Justice Kennedy retired in, I believe, June 2018. Kavanaugh was on the Supreme Court by October of that year. So there's precedent for that happening, but he would have to make a move soon if that was going to be a reality. And it's certainly a realistic possibility Lear Thune has said he's preparing for.
But a justice could have already alerted this White House, and they just might be holding it down. And it could be two. Any buzz at all about Clarence Thomas, who I consider to be one of the great Americans of my time, and also selfless. And I think he might see the Senate at risk too. What do you think?
Well, I think, Clarence Thomas, he's been on the court for a very long time. It's so long, in fact, that he's coming within a couple of years of breaking the record for the longest serving justice. So the little buzz that I've heard on that is that potentially he wants to stay. I believe it's May 2028 when he'd hit that milestone. So he might hang on a bit longer. The retirement buzz is more about Alito.
All right, Sarah Bedford, always good to talk to you. Follow her on X at Sarah C. Bedford. Plus Vote is not a name you hear often. He is the mastermind of the president's budget. He was on the Hill today testifying about that and having some fun with the senators. Cut number 8.
Chairman, I'm honestly astounded that the Democrats would make an issue of inflation when they had 9% inflation under the Biden administration. We hadn't seen anything in nearly a generation. And when we left office, you and I, Mr. Chairman, were having trouble reminding the political class, the economic class, the policy community that inflation could be a problem again. And when the Biden administration began to pass the COVID packages and the Inflation Reduction Act, of course, which weren't anything but, and to spend at a level that we haven't seen in a very long time, it was me and Larry Summers, a Democrat, that were saying we are going to see inflation skyrocket, and in fact we did. It was not because of supply chains or economic shocks. It was because of spending was dramatically increased at a time where there was no need for it at that time. The important rescue measures had already occurred and ensured that we didn't have any kind of deflationary spiral in the midst of COVID. It was because of spending. And so this administration has come into the economic disaster, which was the Biden administration, and gotten costs lower. It has ensured that we have fiscal progress so that the era of big spending is over. Like I've said, we have the end of fiscal futility. I look around at many of the pictures of the chairman who have labored to work at getting the cost curve down, most of them unsuccessful. This particular budget committee has not. They have been successful in conjunction with the President of the United States. I hope that continues. We're in the midst of passing, we passed the extension of the President's tax cuts. Many of those were aimed at working class individuals. They're now going through their first season of seeing what changes that will make on their bottom line, and I think that's going to lead to an explosion in affordability for the American people. This side of the aisle would have said, we're not going to extend those tax cuts, and that would have led to an economic depression. The notion that you're going to raise people's taxes by 30 and 40% and not impact the economy is simply not true. And it's a dishonest debate to be able to say that one side didn't want to extend tax cuts and cause the inflation is somehow going to be a better steward of economic gain and growth in this country than the one that is existing in the White House right now.
I greatly appreciate Director Vogt going up there and spelling it out. The working families tax cut will be responsible for explosive growth. Gas prices are going to come down as soon as with the war with Iran is wrapped up. Their threat to the world will be removed. Israel will be the dominant regional superpower. They will keep the peace. The Gulf will expand the Abraham Accords with Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and others. It's going to be a great next 3 years under President Trump. I'm joined by an old friend, Jonathan Williams. He is president and chief economist of the American Legislative Exchange Council. That would be ALEC, TUALEC.org. And Jonathan is my dear friend and nemesis because he's from that state up north. And every April 15th, ALEC puts out Rich States, Poor States, which you can get a copy of for free at richstatespoorstates.org. And for years and years, Jonathan and I have been doing this for years and years, he's put the thumb on the scale for Michigan. So, Jonathan, let's just start there. Shall we compare Michigan and Ohio? I've got my little richstatespoorstates.org map up, and I look over here at Ohio. By the way, it's good to see you. How are you?
Great to see you, friend. Doing well. And I was actually just talking about you at the U.S. Capitol today. We had the launch event with our Utah delegation in town, and I knew that we were going to have some fun with some good Big Ten sports banter here with Michigan and Ohio State.
Did Utah win again? Are they the rich state #1 again?
Yeah, they sure are. 19 years running, and we had the Speaker of the House, Mike Schultz, and the Senate President, Stuart Adams, and all the members of the Utah House Congressional delegation with us there at the Capitol, and about 45 Utah legislators celebrating this really monumental streak that they've had, and they're going full bore towards 20 years at #1, and we're going to be hosting the ALEC annual meeting out there in Salt Lake, so we're going to have a big party for Utah if that actually happens here next year.
You got to be careful. The Florida delegation is just going to en masse come and mug you someday because they're always #2, and they're like Avis. They're going to come get John. John's an economist. He's a serious student of the economies of these 50 states. But let's check out wonderful Ohio. What's its ranking this year? Economic Outlook rank 15th. Economic Performance rank 34th. Not very good. But let's go look at Michigan, shall we? Michigan, Economic Outlook rank 32nd. Economic Performance rate 35th. For the first time in the years we've been doing this, the Buckeyes have beaten the Wolverines, Jonathan. An honest man. Thank you.
I knew you're going to be on cloud nine today, Hugh, as we talked about this, but it is really a tale of two states this year is one of our key storylines, which is the biggest improvement of any state came in Ohio, and going from 25th to 15th in a jump of 10 spots, where Michigan was actually the state that lost the most ground this year, losing 13 spots and going down there below average. And so just a massive difference in the way that those two states have been governed in recent years. And you juxtapose the great flat tax that we've talked about, 2.75% on personal income there in Ohio now, led by President McCauley and so many of his great colleagues in the Ohio General Assembly, and what Michigan has done. And, thank God, by the way, for Michigan and Matt Hall, the Speaker of the House, who has been on the show many times.
Oh, yeah.
If it wasn't he and his House members, Michigan would be in the bottom 10 right now. I guarantee it. Because of the Whitmer administration and the progressives in the Michigan Senate. But it is a really telling day now that Ohio has taken this place. The other thing, Hugh, that is so important to note is the historical piece of Rich States, Poor States. As you know well, when you go to richstatespoorstates.org, you not only see where you rank in your current edition, you see all 19 editions. And Ohio started, and you probably remember this, Hugh, Ohio started at 47th for Economic Outlook in the first edition, and here you are, all-time best record of 15th. And I'm convinced you're on your way to the top 10. But here's the thing, Hugh, we all got to worry Wolverines and Buckeyes together. We got to worry about the Hoosiers because once again, they are the top 10, and Indiana is really beginning to turn a corner when it comes to this net in-migration and some of the great things that they're seeing.
Yeah, but people still have to live there. I'm joking. Let's look at my two other states of concern. We are Virginians. Virginian is ranked in its economic outlook only 31, and its performance is 21, which suggests that the change in Richmond from Glenn Youngkin to Abigail Spanberger is very bad indeed. It could even be worse than that next year.
Yeah, I think it will. And one thing to just note, as you remember, but your listeners and viewers may not, is this cuts off as of January 1st. So any of the damage that was done in Virginia this session or in states this session, better or for worse, the changes are not captured yet in this rich states, poor states ranking. And so all the big government things that we saw that I know it's still in deliberation in Richmond right now, what Governor Spanberger will sign and what she will veto, that all will be added up to the tally when we see the next edition of Rich States, Poor States in 2027. So TBD a little bit when it comes to Virginia, but obviously very big bad ideas being talked about in Richmond this year.
Two more states I want to cover. One is Maine, because I have family up there and I spend so much time. Sadly, its economic outlook is 44th among 50 states, and its economic performance is 17 because it's only got 1.1 million people, but they're not doing what they need to do to keep up. Then I want to go over to, I always get new affiliates, John. Hickory, North Carolina joined last week, WHKY Talk Radio, 1290 AM, 102.3 FM. I've never looked at North Carolina before, so I pull it up and I'm astonished. It is 4th in the economic rank, and it's 9th in the outlook. They've snuck up on everybody.
Yeah, they really did. It's a great turnaround story. It's one that I think needs to be told and retold in that 10, 15 years ago before conservatives took over the legislature after 150 years of liberal control. You add North Carolina middle of the pack. And here you are today with North Carolina, the 4th best economic outlook in America, huge in migration, huge job creation, and they're just getting started. I mean, you continue to see the progress that they've made, whether it's school choice and economic freedom, kind of that magic combo that we talk about a lot on the show, Hugh. But look at the business taxes and just some of the big investments that they've been getting from job creators coming in. The business tax rate at the end of this decade in North Carolina, Hugh, 0. They're going to have 0 corporate income tax at the end of the decade. Talk about an economic development strategy. You don't have to have these handouts and giveaways like a lot of states do. You can just say, come on into North Carolina for no business taxes. That's a pretty good strategy.
Jonathan, did you in fact add in school choice this year? Were you able to put that in as a metric of your measurement?
Not yet. We're still absolutely going to consider that for when we hit 20 and we can kind of rethink the rankings going forward. But whether we measure it directly or not, we know that it's a huge factor for families. And when you combine the good tax policies and common sense regulatory policies that we're seeing in some of these states with the education freedom side, which is exactly what Utah does. And that's one of the secrets to their success is one of the most pro-family states in America and the most economically free. That's a combo that's really difficult to beat.
So, Jonathan, I want to wrap up by telling our new listeners, our new affiliates, Alec, if you're a state legislator or on their staff, you really want to belong to the American Legislative Exchange Council. It's nonpartisan, it's wonky, it's fun. Is it growing, Jonathan? Are you getting new people from North Carolina, for example, figuring out this is where you get your model policies?
You better believe it. North Carolina is a powerhouse state and continues to grow. In fact, we'll be in Raleigh here in a couple of weeks to put together a policy boot camp for the legislators and continue to bring in new members as we are all across the country.
And finally, richstatespoorstates.org. You'll send them a free copy, won't you?
We will do that. Encourage everybody to check it out here for tax week.
And the reason I bring that up, every time you put that in a guest bedroom, everybody who comes from out of state, they all go and look at it. It's like flies to the light, moths to the screen. If you put Rich States, Poor States out there, it's a fun book. It's always well produced, and it always comes out on April 15th. Jonathan, good to see you again. Look forward to next year when we increase our lead over Michigan. That's all I care about, really, is that Ohio increase. You got a governor's race. It could turn around, right? It could turn around.
Could be John James, and we're talking about really competing again. But once again, we got to watch those Hoosiers, not just football. They're out there to beat us.
I know Mike Braun is a serious business guy. Jonathan Williams, President, CEO, and Chief Economist of ALEC. Thank you, my friend. Go to ALEC or go to richstatespoorstates.org. That's the direct way. You can see the interactive map. You can see where your state ranks. But get the book. Your guests will love it. Got to remind you, I'm in the Relief Factor studio. I'm sponsored by Relief Factor. They keep me going in the Beltway. They keep me going out west. They keep me going in the north. Wherever I go, I take my Relief Factor. I got my 6 miles in this morning. It was a little bit sultry inside the Beltway. The turn is beginning. And as soon as the cherry blossoms go away, the temperatures and the humidity starts to go up. So it's the middle of April. I'll be gone the middle of next month, running away up north. But in the meantime, it's flat. It's the Potomac. I like to get out there and trundle. There's water all the way along. And there's nothing like it. And the best part about it, because I take my Relief Factor every day and have for 13 and a half years, I don't feel any minor aches and pains that come with exercise and aging. You're definitely doing the latter. You should be doing the former. Now, I am not a person who prescribes or suggests anything. I just say move, move, move. Relief Factor makes it easier. Call 1-800, the number 4 in the word relief. Ask for the starter pack, $19.95, less than $1 a day. 1-800, the number 4 in the word relief. Or go to relieffactor.com, relieffactor.com. For the last year and a half, the Iran Breakdown podcast has been my go-to source for serious, extended conversation on the Islamic Republic of Iran and what a menace it is to the world. It's always hosted by Mark Dubowitz, who is the CEO over at FDD. Mark joins me today. Mark, when you began Iran Breakdown, 18 months ago, did you have any idea we would be this close to the collapse of that regime?
Thanks for having me on, Hugh. I did not. I always hoped for that. I've been working on Iran for 23 years, and here at FDD, that's certainly been our objective. But when we started the podcast, we thought we'd have an interesting kind of niche podcast for people who are interested in Iran. But this has certainly been the Iran year and the Iran moment, for which President Trump deserves incredible credit, not only from the American people, but from the Iranian people for all he's done.
Okay, the last mile is always the hardest. They're on their back. The release of the report from the Iranian Central Bank yesterday, 180% inflation, 12 years to recover. The blockade is in effect. Their military is smashed. What do you want to see to come out of any agreement to end hostilities?
So, Hugh, we need to strip Iran of its nuclear weapons capability. We must never give this regime the ability to enrich uranium, because the only thing they want to do with that enriched uranium is turn it into a bomb. We must get the 11 bombs worth of highly enriched uranium out of the country. We must get the thousands of pounds of low enriched uranium out of the country, because that can be turned into weapons grade. We have to put severe restrictions on their ability to rebuild their missile program. Those missiles are deadly and dangerous to our allies, to American bases, to American troops. And by the way, they have a program to build an intercontinental ballistic missile program to threaten the American homeland. They cannot be allowed to reconstitute that missile program. And they got to stop support for terrorism. They've been funding terrorists around the world who've been killing and maiming thousands of Americans for 47 years, as well as literally hundreds of thousands of people from the Middle East and around the world. So we have got to stop this regime from moving forward with its deadly capabilities. If we can do that diplomatically, that's the preferred option. If not, then we're going to have to resort to both military operations and to supporting the Iranian people to take back this country.
Now, Mark, one of the things that has come up is the suggestion that we would settle, the United States would settle for a 20-year ban on enrichment. That strikes some people as like my saying, I refuse to be ineligible for the NFL draft. Do you mind something that is that far out, given the trajectories of Israel, the United States, and the civilized world, and the crushed, shattered remnants of Iran?
I do, Hugh. 20 years is like a blip in time. Anybody who's a parent knows how quickly your kids grow up. 20 years goes by in a flash. And so in 20 years' time, this regime still in power, this regime with all its deadly capabilities now has enrichment. Now this regime can build nuclear weapons. I think this is not something President Trump wants to kick the can down the road to some future president, because he knows there's no future president who is going to have the resolve and the commitment to stop this regime after him. This is his legacy, and he has 2.5 years to ensure that this regime no longer has these deadly capabilities. If we give on enrichment, I don't care if it's 5 years, 10 years, 20, or 50. The fact of the matter is this regime has no reason to have enrichment capability except to build a nuclear weapon. It has sustained $1.5 trillion in damage. It has been battered in 2 wars. It has had countless protests that it's slotted its way through. It is a regime that is dedicated to enrichment capability because it's dedicated to having a nuclear weapon. It can have civilian nuclear energy like 22 other countries and buy its fuel rods from abroad. It's not interested in that offer. The Americans gave that offer to the Iranians a couple months ago. We said free civilian energy, and they said no. And the reason they say no is they need enrichment capability to build a weapon.
So you will be criticizing any deal that says 20 years, 15 years, 25 years. I wanted to get that on the record. I myself want anytime, anywhere inspections, and not just by the IAEA. The JCPOA carved out entire army bases that they weren't allowed to go on. What kind of inspection regimes do you expect out of this, Mark Dubowitz?
You're exactly right. I mean, the notion that somehow, we're only going to inspect their declared facilities, but if we discover some covert facility on an IRGC army base, well, that somehow is off limits is ridiculous. I mean, that's exactly what they'll do is build covert nuclear facilities on IRGC bases, and then they will prevent the IAEA from going in. So we need anywhere, anytime inspections and with no excuses. And the most important thing is it's not what you write on a piece of paper. It's what you're willing to enforce. And I think the Iranians must now know that we are willing to enforce any agreement, not just by taking them to court or taking them to the United Nations, which will be feckless and do nothing, but that we're willing to use all instruments of American and Israeli power to enforce any agreement that we reach with them.
2 more questions. Do we need access to Pickaxe Mountain before we sign any deal with them?
Yeah, I think as your listeners know, Pickaxe Mountain is this site buried deeply underground, even deeper than the Fordo facility that President Trump bombed back in the 12-day war. And we need to dismantle it fully. Otherwise, what the Iranians will do is build a full nuclear weapons program deeply underground, buried under a mountain, and our bombers won't even be able to take it out. So we need it fully dismantled, shot down so that it cannot be reopened. And we also need to make it clear to the Iranians, like, you don't build things below ground. If you build missiles below ground or nuclear facilities below ground, our assumption will be that you are using those and storing those and hiding those for deadly purposes. So nothing below ground, and that has to be a key element of any deal.
So, Mark, when do you see us easing back on sanctions? Let's say they agreed to everything. Mark Dubowitz is at the table, and you're happy with the deal, and then the subject comes up about easing sanctions. When do we begin to ease sanctions in your view?
Well, we begin only easing sanctions once we are certain of their adherence to the agreement and their implementation of the requirements under the agreement. The worst thing we can do is premature sanctions relief, provide this regime with a financial lifeline. Right now, they're economically on their back. We do not want to help them up to their knees and then up to their feet until they have fully implemented all of the conditions of this deal. Full dismantlement of the nuclear program, zero enrichment, zero processing, inability to reconstitute their ballistic missile program, and the end of financing terrorism. Those, Hugh, should not be difficult conditions for the regime to meet. I mean, that is what a normal country doesn't build nuclear weapons to threaten its neighbors. A normal country doesn't fire thousands of ballistic missiles at its neighbors. A normal country doesn't build ICBMs in order to hold its neighbors hostage. And a normal country does not send billions of dollars of money they don't have to fund terrorism. These are reasonable demands. Act like a normal nation, and we'll treat you like a normal nation and provide you the sanctions relief accordingly. Don't act like a normal nation, and we're going to use all elements of American power to stop you.
Well, I want to close by just saying I appreciate the work of the FDD. From top to bottom, you folks turn out the best content on Iran, the most level-headed, the most detailed, the most trustworthy information on the Islamic Republic, and hopefully its demise is in the near future. And you folks from top to bottom for many, many years will be largely responsible for Washington, D.C. correcting the terrible mistake of the JCPOA. Mark Dubowitz, thank you. Follow him on X at @mdubowitz. Follow FDD at FDD. Yesterday, I was at the annual gathering of American Global Strategies conference of clients and heavyweights talking about international security. I was honored to moderate a panel that was really fun to talk to. Alex Gray is the CEO of AGS, American Global Strategies. Alex, of all of the things you heard yesterday, what surprised you the most and the least?
Well, it's always fun to have you there, Hugh, and it's always great to see some of my longtime friends and colleagues who've gone on to big jobs in government. And look, I think the thing that's the least surprising is that the focus now, so much of every regional functional topic is geoeconomic. Donald Trump has, in a way that probably would have been unprecedented 10 years ago, brought trade, economic security, supply chains into the forefront of every conversation, whether it's Iran, whether it's China, whether it's Russia, whether it's the Western Hemisphere. It's economic security, economic security, economic security. So that suffused all of the panels on disparate topics. And I guess that didn't really surprise me at least in the recent years. What did surprise me was in a world where we are moving so quickly from crisis to crisis. When we held this conference a year ago, Ukraine was the most important topic. It was suffused every panel. Ukraine rarely came up because it's been replaced in the immediate consciousness by Iran. And so I think it just reminds us that even though these are substantial events in their own right, there's just a limited bandwidth. This applies to policymakers, analysts, industry. There's a limited bandwidth to focus on a world that in some ways is just on fire, and keeping up with the conflict du jour is a challenging thing to do.
So, Alex, I was only there for one panel, and the thing that surprised me about the panel is that all three panelists, which includes your colleague at AGS, Robert O'Brien, they have a longing for NATO not to go away. I'm kind of a realist. I love NATO for the last 50 years of my adult life. I think it's crumbling before our eyes. What was the tone of the rest of the conference? Because I had to leave.
Well, look, you're right, Hugh. I think the NATO. I think there's a mix here of people who are nostalgic for a NATO that's not coming back, and folks who are probably more like you and I, which is more realistic, that NATO has essentially committed suicide. Donald Trump spent the first 4 years of his first presidency fighting to save NATO. The allies didn't feel that way, but that's what he was doing. He used what we used to call diplomacy, tough love, to force the allies to finally spend a proportionate amount of their own GDP on defense. And he saved the alliance. It was headed to terminal decline. And what the allies have done by sabotaging and trying to do everything they can to undermine the president's efforts against Iran, using our own bases, our own assets that we use, frankly, for their security more than ours, in an operation that benefits them in a lot of ways more than it benefits us in the immediate term, that has undermined confidence in NATO in a way that just I'm not sure is going to be recoverable. And so while I share a lot of the affection and the some of the sense of nostalgia for an alliance that at one point was the most effective alliance in world history, I'm with you, Hugh. I think it's on its way to potentially terminal decline because of the choices that the leaders of the NATO states have made themselves.
And that's the bad news. The good news is the Quad and those who are Quad adjacent are stepping up and gelling. And that, for the benefit of the Steelers fans, that's the United States, Australia, Japan, and India, and adjacent to it, the Philippines, Singapore, Taiwan, maybe Vietnam. I felt pretty good after talking to the panelists yesterday about that.
Yeah, you should feel good about it, Hugh. I agree with you. It's Quad plus. It's India, Japan, Australia, the United States, and then a rotating cast of regional characters based on what's going on at any given time. And that was a great legacy of the first Trump administration, was Quad plus. The Biden administration actually continued it in a positive way, and it's continuing even further in the second Trump term. The reality is that as the president pivots to Asia And you and I have talked about this, Hugh. One of the virtues of the Iran conflict is that the president is actually addressing the thing that has been keeping us from pivoting to Asia for 16 years since Hillary Clinton made that speech in 2010. By actually ending the Iran threat, we'll be hopefully able to move to that pivot that's been long delayed. And when we do that, we're going to need an alliance structure, a partnership structure in the Indo-Pacific that'll facilitate us being able to deter Chinese malign activity and Chinese aggression. The Quad, when you think about the combination of economic power and military power and diplomatic clout, the Quad is the vehicle to do that. And so I think that
the times,
well-placed optimism.
The times are changing, but not necessarily for the worse. Alex Gray, CEO of American Global Strategies. Thank you for joining me, Alex. Former United States Senator Jim Talent sits on the Reagan Board of Peace through Strength, and he is my weekly guest on matters national security. Jim, I think we've won this war. The president keeps saying we have, and I think we have. What do you think?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think so. We've destroyed their inventories. We've destroyed the industrial base that produced the inventories. We're strangling the economy now. I think the next set of negotiations, we are essentially going to be dictating terms. And keep in mind, that while we're not talking about regime change, the Israelis are explicitly affirming that that's what they want. And eventually those protesters are going to hit the street. There's going to be some precipitating cause. And there's only one person on the face of planet Earth who can keep the Israelis from supporting them, and that's Donald J. Trump. So, I mean, if the Iranians had better be ready, I think, the next time just to agree to terms.
Now, Jim, I read yesterday from Iran International, the Central Bank of Iran report that said 180% inflation is a given. It will take 12 years to rebuild. And that's if they're moving the oil. I don't think they're moving the oil. I don't know how they get out of this jam, do you?
No, I don't. I mean, if you had a military strategist on there, I think he would say we have effectively attacked their center of gravity, their ability to generate and sustain coercive power, much less to integrate the exercise of that power. I mean, their top 3 or 4 leadership ranks are gone. They're sown with dissension. They're going to have to do something that signals to us they're giving up. And I think the most visible thing is going, other than opening the strait, which is, I think, getting open anyway, is to turn over that enriched uranium. They're going to have to give us that picture of handing over to an American delegation the uranium, and they're going to have to let us go wherever we want to inspect what remains of their nuclear program. I think that's what Trump's aiming for.
That is a key thing to me. Anytime, anywhere inspection, the JCPOA put off limits, enormous military bases, and we had to give 48 hours notice, and sometimes they'd say no. It was the worst deal ever.
Yeah. I mean, the next set of talks, which will happen, I think, are going to be the 4th set in the last year. Well, I mean, Trump offered him negotiation after Operation Midnight Hammer. Then we negotiated before Operation Epic Fury. Then we just had the negotiations in Islamabad. And each time they have gotten demonstrably weaker and weaker. They hold fewer and fewer cards. Now, I've said on the show before, Donald Trump is not the kind of negotiator who's going to be willing to give you more generous terms when you're weaker and weaker and weaker, and he has more and more leverage. So, as I said, I think it's going to be whatever the president thinks amounts to effectively surrender in this context.
Is there a good argument, Jim, for, no, we don't want to meet with you now. We're just going to keep the blockade here until May 15. If you shoot at us, we'll crush you, everything that moves, but we're not going to let you have any money until May 15th. What do you think of that argument?
Yeah, I mean, I said on the pod with Dwayne the other day, the president's being more merciful than I would be. But I'm glad he's running this show and not me. I mean, because after what they've done, I'd have gone after their utility and transportation infrastructure. And you'll notice, as far as their proxies are concerned, which everybody mentions and which is important to mention, you notice that Hezbollah is now on their own. Iran started a week ago saying, oh, the ceasefire has to include Hezbollah. Well, it doesn't include Hezbollah, and they're still not shooting at us, are they? So
No,
Hezbollah
and
learned.
in fact, Israel is not in a hurry to have a ceasefire with Lebanon. They're working with Lebanon. That's the first time in decades, but it would be good to take them out root and branch. I've never been to Lebanon, Jim. There was a time when everybody went there. Have you ever been there?
No, I have not. But you're right. I mean, it was one of the most high-end, well-developed, and stable Middle Eastern countries until the Iranians subverted it. The way they subverted Syria, Yemen, Gaza, and have gone a long way towards subverting Iraq with these proxies. But they don't have any more money to support the proxies, and they don't have any more means to do it. So, you strike at the root and the branches begin to wither.
So we've got two MEUs, Marine Expeditionary Units, in the area now, and the one pop gun that hasn't gone off are the Houthis. Do you think the MEUs are there for them?
I wouldn't think. I have not. When I listen to the strategists, I've not heard of the MEUs mentioned in the context of the Houthis or the Red Sea. I think they're there as an alternative, as an option, in case we need to do raids along the Iranian shore in case they start shooting, or if the president wanted to occupy one of the islands. And I know that a lot of the land forces guys will say, well, we shouldn't do that because we have to sustain it. It'll be difficult. But on the other hand, if you have total air and naval superiority, how can they attack an island? It's an island.
Yeah, an island.
I mean, how do you move?
Last question is legislative. President needs a supplemental of $200 billion for the Pentagon. And if we lose the House, we're not going to get anything we want for the next 2 years. Why aren't we already moving on a reconciliation to fund the government for the rest of the Trump presidency and the big shipbuilding push? Why aren't we doing that?
Exactly. That's a very good question. I heard the leader say on your show, what was it, about a week ago, 10 days ago, that they were going to move a reconciliation bill. I think I heard him say that, and I think it's important to do for exactly the reason that you mentioned. I mean, in other words, that $200 billion is going to cover the cost of the war, and it's also going to enable the department to carry out, for example, its plan to rebuild the maritime industrial base. Now, I would not assume that if the Democrats get the House, that we're not going to be able to pass defense appropriations bills with some reasonable numbers. I think we probably will, but we still ought to pass the reconciliation bill. I agree.
Okay, and a last question. Do you think the war, if it's conclusively won, helps the Republicans in November? Gas prices won't be back to where they were supposed to be, but we will have won a war for the first time, I don't know, since World War II, conclusively, 1991, I guess. Do you think it helps?
I think Americans love a winner, Hugh. Yeah, I think, and I would like to get it over with, because right now we're using our bandwidth to talk about the war, and I would like to talk about the good things that we've done in the economic space, and there's a whole list of achievements there. So, but yeah, Americans love a winner.
I hope you're right. Jim Talent on X. Just follow him at Jim Talent. Just because I haven't mentioned it doesn't mean I've forgotten that today is tax day, infamous tax day, April 15th. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was on Fox earlier today talking about it. Cut number 9.
This year, refunds are up 13%. And we've got, as of April 12th, we had 52 million returns filed. And of those returns, 45% of them have one of the president's 4 signature policies in the working families tax cuts. So no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, reduced taxes for seniors, and deductibility of auto loans for American-made cars. By far, what we're seeing on the tax returns, the biggest is almost 25% have taken no tax on overtime. And it's the American way. You want to work harder, you keep more of it.
I love tax day when you have people like Scott Bessent to explain why the working family tax cut was so good. But you can save some more money. Listen, consumercellular.com/Hugh. consumercellular.com/Hugh, or call them 1-800-411-4454. 1-800-411-4454. 1-800-411-4454. And remember, my code is Hugh. when you use your promo code Hugh. If you switch from Big Cell to Consumer Cellular, as millions of people are doing, you will get your second month of service free. Consumer Cellular offers you flexible, all sorts of customizable, affordable plans that fit your life and budget, not the other way around. They're not trying to sell you a long-term contract. There are no hidden fees. They are not trying to get you to buy a new expensive phone or trick you into thinking you got one for free. No, it's all straight up consumer service. Customer service is all here in the United States. It's well believed in as being the best in the cellular phone business. Give it a try. 1-800-411-4454. Remember my name, Hugh. And I also want you to remember, if you are 50 and older, you can get one line of unlimited talk, text, and data on consumer cellular plans for just $35 a month. That's the way you make your budget. That's the way you keep it. ConsumerCellular.com/Hugh. Finally, AndrewandTodd.com. Right now, a lot of people are finding themselves betwixt and between in the housing market. It's gotten off to a slow start in the spring selling season because people don't know what's going to happen with rates. They're worried about the war. Rates are pretty stable. And if you'll call Andrew and Todd at 888-888-1172, they'll tell you what your rate is likely to be. Depends on your credit. Depends on where you want to live. Depends on how much you're going to put down. Depends on a lot of things. But you can believe in one thing with Andrew Del Rey and Todd Avakian, they will get you the best deal possible. They are the underwriter. They are the bank. They write the loan. They're with Union Home Mortgage. They've taken care of thousands of my listeners over many, many, many years, including me, including Dwayne, including many people in Salem. And they do it by making sure they give you the best opportunity. If you're a veteran, no money down. If you're a first-time home buyer, they'll explain it all for you in an FHA loan, whether it makes sense. And if you're a senior and you need a reverse mortgage, AndrewandTodd.com. 888-888-1172. 888-888-1172. Come back next hour. Sarah Isker is here to talk about her brand new book on the Supreme Court called Last Branch Standing. As promised, a special hour as we enter into the end of the court year, the Supreme Court year. Lots of stuff begins to speculate. You begin to hear about maybe one retirement, maybe two, about big decisions that have to come down, including birthright citizenship. You'll probably start listening to the SCOTUS blog, wonderful Advisory Opinions podcast, and you should be reading this book by Sarah Isker, Last Branch Standing, a potentially surprising, occasionally winning journey inside today's Supreme Court. Now, I have a column about Sarah's book tomorrow in the Fox News opinion section. It says it's not just occasionally funny, it's very funny throughout. Sarah Isker, welcome back to the Hugh Hewitt Show. It's been a while.
My God, Hugh, you old so-and-so.
Well, thank you. It is. You have a fabulous new book out. I want it to start, and I want you to know the Frank Luntz rule that if you don't say the title of the book 7 times in every segment, the listeners won't remember Last Branch Standing. So are you practicing Last Branch Standing? I listened to you and Mary Catherine yesterday for a nanosecond. Then I realized, oh my God, it's an interview. I got to turn it off because I don't like to hear interviews with authors before I do them myself. How'd it go with Mary Catherine?
Well, I mean, Mary Catherine and I, we text a lot, we hang out a lot. What we don't do is actually record our conversations a lot, so we went off on any number of tangents. We had a great time.
Did she get back to the meat of the book? Oh, she said she's like Dennis Prager. He doesn't read books before he interviews the author. I read them. And so let's get marching. There's a lot to cover. And I'm going to start with the vegetables, though there's lots of dessert. I want to assure the ordinary reader out there, lots of dessert, but there are vegetables. The dessert is like Mrs. Scalia's meatballs and bong hits for Jesus. We'll get to that. But let's start with the vegetable. First, Donald Trump isn't much of a fascist if he abides by the ruling overturning the tariffs, is he?
That's right. I mean, we've had basically the Supreme Court has been defined by presidents who have wanted to go up against it, thwart it, ignore it. The Supreme Court, as we know it, exists because of Thomas Jefferson trying to impeach and remove Samuel Chase from the Supreme Court in 1805. He wanted to remove Chief Justice John Marshall next. He wanted the Supreme Court to reflect his politics. The fact that John Marshall was able to, run circles around him is really what creates the independent third branch of government that we have.
And you also quote Justice Jackson, my favorite, not Brown Jackson, Justice Robert Jackson, my favorite justice in 1941, quote, In spite of its apparently vulnerable position, this court has repeatedly overruled and thwarted both the Congress and the executive. And you know, people like President Trump who don't like the ruling, people like Richard Nixon who want to keep his tapes, they comply. That's in the water table, isn't it, Sarah?
When I read that quote, I was like, oh, this is so modern. It explains exactly what's going on right now. My argument is that Donald Trump is actually helping the Supreme Court. He is, on the one hand, proving how independent it is from partisan politics and how independent his own nominees are to the court. And at the same time, he is ensuring its legitimacy by complying with its orders. He can rail against how much he hates these justices and how much he hates this court after the tariff decision, and then immediately he took down his unlawful tariffs. Perfect.
Yes. Perfect. And just like Richard Nixon, here are the tapes. I'm not going to burn them. Okay, Sarah, page 241. Too often, you write, casual court watchers think the Supreme Court is deciding whether policy X is good policy. But as we know, the court is often tasked with deciding only who gets to decide. Actually, that's all the Supreme Court ever does. Now, I've been teaching con law for 31 years, and I've never put it that succinctly, but I wish I had, and I will steal it. Would you expand on that?
Absolutely. So, for instance, two of the biggest cases this term are about whether Mississippi can accept mail-in ballots 5 days after the election. There's another big case on whether the administration can turn someone away before they reach the southern border, technically, and prevent them from applying for asylum in this country. The questions before the court in those cases are not whether this is good policy or bad policy or who's the good guys or anything else like that. The only question is what Congress said in the statutes involved in that. In the ballot case, Congress says there's an election day. Does that mean, as they talked about in oral argument, the election has to be consummated on election day? Or did Congress not really say anything about that? They just said there needs to be an election day when you vote, and so they left it up to the states to decide when to receive and count the ballots. What used to happen is that when the Supreme Court would decide these cases, Congress the next day would amend the act in question, pass a new law to fix it. They did this in the Voting Rights Act case. They did this as recently in the Lilly Ledbetter Act case during the Obama administration. None of us believe that Congress will react to the Supreme Court's decisions anymore. None of us believe that we have the power to ratify a new amendment to the Constitution. And so the Supreme Court becomes the last word instead of part of this ongoing dialogue. And because they're not democratically accountable, the pressure rises as we don't feel like we can do anything about it. Confirmation hearings become more contentious because it's life tenure and they're the last word. And all of that is bad for the court, but we're blaming the wrong branch. Blame Congress.
Congress. Amen. Are you betting on 0, 1, or 2 retirements this term, Sarah Isgur?
I do not think that Clarence Thomas is retiring, so I'll knock out 2 right there. I think whether Justice Alito is retiring is a very close call. There's good arguments to be had on both sides. So going with my gut, I think he's staying, but I could make the argument that he's going. You know, when justices often retire is July 2nd before a midterm election, and that is where we are. What's interesting is to talk about who would replace him, whether the White House is perhaps sending signals to try to entice him to retire by telling him that they'll, for instance, appoint a former clerk like Judge Andy Oldham of the Fifth Circuit who could continue his legacy. On the other hand, I really like the idea of picking someone like Ted Cruz because I think we are missing something at the Supreme Court by not having former elected officials and the just kind of diversity that we used to have. I mean, these guys currently on the court all have basically the exact same resumes. We've professionalized what it means to be able to compete for a Supreme Court seat. You look at the guys on the Brown v. Board of Education court, 8 of them had served in the military. 5 of them went to public law schools. 1 of them didn't even go to law school at all. 5 of them had been in elected office, a governor, some senators, a congressman, 2 attorneys general. That's a whole lot of people who understand more than just how to teach Fed courts. No offense.
And no, and I don't teach Fed courts because I don't want to. I just teach con law. I couldn't agree with you more. I was a Harriet Miers backer to the bitter end because she had been the managing partner of a law firm, which I thought would be an excellent skill set, a big law firm, an excellent skill set on the court. But I couldn't say amen enough to when I was reading that part of, let's remind people the name of the book, Last Branch Standing in bookstores now. Now, among the people who might, I think it's going to be 2 retirements because I think Clarence Thomas is the most selfless person I've met in a long career in Washington, D.C. And I think Judge Alito is the same way, and Molly Hemingway's book is a big clue, I think. But among replacements, Naomi Rao, 53, David Strauss, 51, Eileen Cannon is 45, that would make the left head blow up. Allison Jones Rushing on the Fourth Circuit is 43. Amul Thapar, everybody's favorite. I noticed you noted his book in your footnotes. 56. Don Willett, 59, probably too old. Judge Ho, 53. What do you think of my list?
I think that's a great list. You left off Andy Oldham. Is that because I already said him? Judge Andy Oldham of the Fifth Circuit? Okay, because he's young. He's an Alito clerk. I think he's number 1 on the list. But your list is the normie list, the circuit court judge list. I think there's also John Sauer, who's the current Solicitor General. He has the shiny resume, but he also has served in this Trump administration. Elena Kagan was Obama's Solicitor General before she went on the court. I think that's a path that Trump could look at as well.
It's an interesting game of speculation. Do you think that justices have tipped Trump? I do. I think 1 or 2 of them have tipped Trump so that they can do the work quietly and announce a nominee on July 2nd, and that their resignation will take effect upon confirmation. But I don't think they're going to trumpet that until the term is over.
So we have, some insight into this from past terms. 3 of the current justices replaced their former bosses whom they had clerked for. Chief Justice Roberts replaced Chief Justice Rehnquist, of course. But notice the recent trend.
Justice Jackson.
Kavanaugh. Yes, Justice Kavanaugh replaced Justice Kennedy. Justice Jackson replaced Justice Breyer. Both of those justices, I would informationally speculate, had been enticed off the court by some indications of who would replace them.
But Sarah, isn't that terrible? We'll take this in the next segment. Professionalization is itself its own problem, which you've dealt with to a greater extent than anyone else I've seen read this. But the idea of hereditary justices, though not direct lineal descendants, that bothers me a lot. Stay tuned, America. Sarah's a lovely guest. The book is Last Branch Standing. Go and get it. Sarah Isgur is with me. Her brand new book is Last Branch Standing. Last Branch Standing. Last Branch Standing is not just for lawyers, though lawyers will benefit from it. It certainly will be beneficial to law students who have to try and figure out what all that gobbledygook means. Don't take Fed courts. You don't have to do it. Don't go on law review. You don't need to do it. Let us join hands together, Sarah Isgur, and denounce concurrences and long opinions. You hold up Sackett versus EPA. It's actually a 9-0 case. It's the world in which I worked, permitting, federal permitting, for the 30 years that I did parallel practice of law with teaching and broadcasting. We've been waiting for Sackett for years. It could have been 3 lines. Wetlands do not give jurisdiction to the Army Corps of Engineers unless they're attached to a jurisdictional water. Why is that happening? Why do they all have to go on at great length?
Well, you have to kind of go back in history. So the Supreme Court didn't have control over its docket until 1925. They had to hear every appeal that was brought to them, which was miserable. They had a whole backlog of cases. They all hated it, and they begged Congress to have discretion over their jurisdiction. The second they get that discretion, what it means to be a Supreme Court justice, what the job of the Supreme Court is, changes dramatically. And what we see in the decades after that is the largest expansion of sort of new constitutional rights in American history. Why? Because the justices had the time to do it, and they knew they wouldn't have to then take a whole flood of cases after they decided those. The other thing that happened was we start to see the existence of dissents and concurrences slowly at first, but a gas expands to fill its container. So as the Supreme Court took fewer and fewer cases, I mean, in my lifetime, they were taking 150 cases. In my law school time, they were taking close to that many cases. They're now taking fewer than 60 a year, but they're basically writing the same amount. And these justices, as they sort of move more into the spotlight, again, because Congress isn't doing its job and the presidency's running the country by executive order, each justice wants to be known, to be heard, for their judicial ideology to be understood. And so they write these concurrences. We are now up to an average of 3 concurrences per opinion. That's mind-blowing.
Now, Sarah, I don't know. Who taught you con law? Charles Freed?
I had Charles Freed. I had some Jack Goldsmith.
Oh, two superbs. I don't know what their rule is. I tell my law students, ignore the concurrences, find the binding opinion. That might be opinion of one in a 414 case. Find the binding opinion. That's the law you need to know until it changes. And by the way, you can skip the dissents unless they're entertaining, like Scalia, and occasionally Justice Kagan throws in one that they ought to read. Did they approach it that way, or were they really boring old read it all and know it all?
That's a good question. You know, I guess I like the concurrences as a reader and a pundit and a nerd. I just don't think it's very good for the
of
rule
course
of
you
law.
like the concurrences.
Yeah.
The
It's just bad for
podcasters
the law.
need concurrences.
It's bad for the lower courts because we've seen this in the
Yes.
Second Circuit, for instance, recently. The Supreme Court decides a gun case, but there's a concurrence by Justice Jackson, and the Second Circuit applies the concurrence. And it's like, well, wait a second, what? That's not the opinion of the court.
It's not the opinion of the court, and I think it's you highlighted. It's excellent. By the way, I should tell the audience, you and David French do a wonderful podcast called Advisory Opinions. I listen to it if I can't listen to the arguments, and sometimes I can't listen to the arguments because I'm working. And I would like to make a request of advisory opinions. In the column I write about your book tomorrow for Fox News, I make the argument that it is unconstitutional to pack the court, to go above 9. Even though the 14th Amendment is passed with due process of law guaranteed in 1868, and they changed the number of justices to 9 in 1869, I still think the due process of law will be broken if the court is packed with 5 Justice Brown Jacksons the first time the Democrats get a chance. What do you think of my theory?
I think it would be really hard for the current Supreme Court to be the one to say that. I would love to do anything to prevent them from packing the court. Anyone. You know, the right's really mad at the Supreme Court now, too. The political right, I mean. I don't want them packing the court. The court is meant to be counter-majoritarian. That's how we get First Amendment rights. If everyone liked the speech, if the majority loved what you were saying, you wouldn't need a First Amendment to protect it. And the court being beholden to a political branch will destroy that. Criminal justice rights, gone. Religious rights, gone. Again, not because one side controls or the other, but because the branch itself will have been destroyed. So I like that idea. It's a question of, like, who's going to stand up and make that
It's a question of
case?
how to make it justiciable. I don't know how to get it before the court, but I would like to have people like you and David. I think David's mad at me. I'm not sure why. But I would like to have people like you and David talking about how the rule of law will be broken if we pack the court, either left or right. Let me get to some of the fun stuff, if we can. Judge Ho and the biosphere trees. I actually had not read that until I read Last Branch Standing. Do you want to explain it?
Absolutely. So Judge James Ho of the Fifth Circuit has been a longtime friend and mentor, and I had heard him give this speech about Biosphere 2. If you're older, like me, you may remember this. In the early 90s, they built a sphere and had people live in it for years to sort of prove that we could create an Earth, you know, if we wanted to go to Mars or something like that you could farm food and the trees could make enough oxygen. And they had these trees that they planted, and they grew much faster than trees on Earth because they didn't face, you know, any of the adversity, storms, wind, freezings, whatever. And then they would get to a certain height and they would all fall over.
Yep.
And they realized that it was exactly because they didn't have the wind and the freeze and the adversity, they didn't build something that scientists now know as stress wood that allows trees to thrive. And so the argument that I make in the book is that the Supreme Court has built, you know, 200 plus years of stress would since John Marshall, and thanks to John Marshall. And it's a much tougher branch than it was when Jefferson tried to smother it, and thank God.
And in the last branch standing, you'll come away thinking, this is a pretty good system. Let's not mess it up. And maybe you will join me, all of you listening, in defending the Senate filibuster, because that's the first hurdle to protecting the court that must be crossed. Sarah, let's now talk about the justices themselves. I agree with you. The Chief Justice is basically, this is a quote, the Shakespeare of legal writing. He really is. I also agree with you that Justice Barrett is the one you would most like to RSVP to your dinner party. When did you decide to kind of come up with these little one-liners describing the justices? Justice Brown Jackson, the one you would most like to attend a Broadway musical with, if you wanted to sing.
Yeah, if you don't mind the person next to you sort of humming along and singing, which frankly, I saw Chess on Broadway 2 months ago, and I had trouble not singing along because it's my favorite musical. When did I decide that? I don't know. You're like, writing is such a solo project, and you sort of are entertaining yourself along the way as well. And I wanted people to understand, you know, like one personal human takeaway for each justice, several of whom I've known. Elena Kagan was my dean in law school, and I knew her quite well. I was married by Justice Kavanaugh in his chambers, and I wanted people to feel those things that I know from them, but without having to write, pages and pages about them.
Without dishing, I want to say it is the nicest revelatory book about the justices, because Sarah's not out to assassinate anyone's character or attack anyone's judicial philosophy. It's a grand book, Last Branch Standing. I hope you're enjoying Sarah Isker. Her brand new book, Last Branch Standing, is a fabulous book. Read more about it in my column for Fox News tomorrow. Sarah, let's do a little bit of the dishing. You say that the deciders are Chief Justice Roberts and Justices Barrett and Kavanaugh. I think that's impossible to argue with. And you also note that some conservatives, I think this can be overstated, are mad at Justice Barrett. I love Justice Barrett. I think she's brilliant. I mean, absolutely. If I'm in front of Justice Barrett, I'm going to get a fair decision whether I'm right or wrong. I also think that's true about the Chief and about Judge Kavanaugh. And I don't know Judge Kavanaugh at all. I know the Chief best of all of them, and I barely know Justice Barrett. I've only interviewed her a couple of times. Who do you think you'd get the fairest shake from on the court?
I think you and I are going to be always drawn to Justice Barrett because she's a formalist. And I think you and I are kind of formalists as well. Like, you want to make sure every T and I is dotted before you even get into court, because we don't want the court reaching down to choose its cases. The court has a very specific and hands-off role, and I like that about the way she approaches the law. But, and you've sort of mentioned this a little bit previously, if you just want a great opinion, I mean, you want Justice Kagan on that. She's the best writer on the court. And I went back and read her master's thesis from before she went to law school. Turns out she's always been a good writer. Was she born this way? Like, I need to find like a third grade paper to check.
No, if I lost to Justice Kagan, and I've never argued before the Supreme Court, so it's a hypothetical, I've only argued before the Ninth Circuit. If I lost to Justice Kagan, I would have to revisit the point of view that I was trying to argue. You call Neil Gorsuch the vigilante and that he'd be the best justice in a bar fight. I think that's very well put. So have you heard from him about that yet?
I have not, but I talked to many, many clerks for this book, and Justice Gorsuch's former clerks have certainly read that, and they didn't argue with it. I'll just say that.
All right. Now I want to get to the professionalization, because here you are singing Hugh's song. As I said, I supported Harriet Miers because she'd been White House counsel. She would have the executive branch point of view. She'd managed a large law firm. She was not a scholar and not a circuit court judge. And I just think we've gone way off the railroad toward professionalization. Then you put the stats in on feeder judges and how one gets to be a clerk and how you make a $500,000 bonus when you come off the clerkship. This is not what the framers intended, Sarah. How much of a problem do you think it is, or do you like it?
I think it's a big problem for the future of the court as the pool gets narrower and narrower, and that pool is more and more removed from all sorts of parts of American life. And if you're not in that pool, you can't keep moving up. So one of the problems I point out, we talked about, to become a Supreme Court justice at this point, you need to have clerked for a Supreme Court justice. To clerk for a Supreme Court justice, you must have clerked for multiple circuit court judges. Well, guess what? There's a set number of circuit court judges. So when we have all of these law students,
feeder justice.
Yes.
Tell people what a feeder justice is.
Well, not all circuit judges are created equal. There's some who send more of their clerks to the Supreme Court. So like when Justice Kavanaugh was Judge Kavanaugh on the DC Circuit, 3.4 out of 4 of his clerks a year on average went on to clerk at the Supreme Court. That's the highest number that I have been able to find of all time. But that's the type of thing that a feeder judge is. But it also means that we're having fewer clerks overall because some of the clerks are hungry, hippoing up the clerkships. And of course, they're going to be the ones who are able to take lower paying jobs for multiple years to put off joining a law firm or starting their careers or moving home to take care of their parents, things like that. They're going to come from a certain amount of elite privilege. And second, they're very likely to have come from an Ivy League or adjacent law school. And guess how you get into those? By going to an Ivy League or adjacent undergrad. And guess how you get into those? By having a certain profile and resume early in your life. So in many ways, we are narrowing the pool to become a Supreme Court justice to like what ninth graders are choosing. And it's bad for the court.
We are geographically narrowing it. Until Justice Barrett came along from New Orleans, we had not had a Southerner forever. And most of our justices, including Justice Gorsuch, though he came from Colorado, grew up in D.C., the Beltway effect on these people is extraordinary. Do you think that's bad for them, too?
Obviously bad. When we come back, can I tell you about how Justice Gorsuch and Kavanaugh are twins and how it actually helps explain a whole nother world view into the Supreme Court?
I can't wait. It's coming right back with Sarah Isgur, her brand new book, Last Branch Standing, her podcast with David French's Advisory Opinions. My last segment with Sarah Flores. Her book is Last Branch Standing. Last Branch Standing is available in bookstores and airports, at Amazon, at barnesandnoble.com. You'll love it. You'll laugh. I mean, you really will laugh. We got to get to Mrs. Scalia's meatballs in a second. But first, tell me how Kavanaugh and Gorsuch are twins.
So this is an important way to understand the court because we're told by the media all the time just to think of them as partisans in Congress, right? It's 6-3, right versus left, Republican versus Democrat, red shirt, blue shirt. Gorsuch and Kavanaugh only agreed with each other 50% of the time last term. Justice Kavanaugh was more likely to agree with every other justice, except Justice Jackson, than with Justice Gorsuch. But they're both like the same amount of conservative. So why? They also both came from powerful DC mothers before there was a women's restroom in the Senate. They went to the same high school and had the same history teacher. They clerked on the Supreme Court for the same justice on the same term. They both had senior jobs in the W administration, then go on the circuit courts, and then are appointed by the same president to the Supreme Court. So why aren't these guys ruling the same way? I mean, they're Federalist Society lab petri dish creations. And yet they repel each other to other sides of the V. And the answer is because of their institutionalism, incrementalism, how they view stare decisis, all these things that the media doesn't talk to us about, but that are actually really important predictors of how these cases are going to come out. So Kavanaugh thinks of this as a middle school group project, right? Everyone contributes what they can, but at the end of the day, you turn in one diorama to the teacher. Gorsuch is like, I'm just here to tell you what Neil thinks. That's my only job. And so he's the great concurrer. He's adding, his 2 cents almost every time that there's a major decision. Obviously, in the tariffs case, that's sort of his most famous concurrence to date. And he's like, I don't really care what previous courts decided. I don't care what the effects of this decision are going to be. That's not my problem. Go to Congress, go to the president. But here, my job is just to tell you the four corners of the case and the facts of the law.
And if I destroy most of the jurisdiction of Oklahoma's police department by rendering it unsuitable for Indian lands, it's not my problem. It's the treaty's problem. Sarah, do you also think it might be because each of the 9 are particularly passionate about a specific thing? I think Justice Barrett is very passionate about the free exercise case. In fact, in City of Philadelphia v. Fulton, in a concurrence, she said, Employment Division v. Smith, it's dead case walking. We got to come up with something new. But the academic world has not yet provided her with a new test. And we've talked about that on this show and on before live audiences. I think they all have passion. They're normal people. They get excited about some stuff and other stuff they don't care about.
I think that's true. I also just think some of them are more incrementalist, like with that opinion that you talk about, she's like, okay, we're going to move right here. Then we're going to look around, see what the second order effects might be that we maybe didn't think about. And then we'll take the next step in the next case. Whereas Gorsuch in the McGirt case that you're talking about in Oklahoma was like, YOLO, I don't care what happens. Congress can have a new treaty if they want. Not my problem.
So how has this book been received? I mean, first of all, do the justices listen? Right now we have, because we are doing this in the 5 o'clock hour, at least 2 justices listening. Do the justices tell you one way or the other what they think about Advisory Opinions, your podcast, or have you gotten any feedback on Last Branch Standing from them yet?
I have reason to believe that justices tune in from time to time to the podcast. I sent each of them a copy of the book, certainly, and I got a very lovely note from one of the justices thanking me for trying to explain the court to everyone.
I'm going to guess that's Justice Barrett because she is the epitome of good manners and what I will call winsomeness. By the way, I use that word in regard to your writing in tomorrow's review. Last Branch Standing, Sarah, you've done so much. You've been so many places. What's your ambition?
I wish I knew the answer to that. I think all the time, especially right now, what I want to be when I grow up. I've changed careers several times. I've rarely held a job for more than 18 months or so. As you know, I was on the campaign trail for like 15 years for a while. So I guess I get bored easily or I get fired easily. I don't know.
Are you interested in teaching the next generation? I find teaching to be wonderful. I take now in my older years, I take every other year off because it's not that wonderful. Are you going to be a teacher? You'd be a superb teacher.
I love undergraduates. I think law students maybe already know a little too much and are a little too solidified. But I do like talking to law students too. The problem is I get so attached to each one. I have to spend enormous amounts of time, grading every paper to give them notes and taking them to coffee and figuring out their internships. And it's a very much a lifelong relationship. I just got a text earlier today from a former student at George Washington University who's gone on into campaign world. And I'm just so proud of each one of them when I do, adjunct teaching.
Now, in terms of books, though, Last Branch Standing is a pretty definitive look at the court. Where do you go from here in your writing?
I'm pretty interested in writing about, for instance, like the Netflix version of Marbury versus Madison. Some of these cases maybe that people have heard about, but they don't really know what they're about, or the law part might be a little bit boring, but the characters and bringing people into that history and how modern it feels to me, I'd love to write something like that.
And of the justices, some have written their own books. Justice Barrett, Justice Gorsuch, Justice Thomas, Justice Breyer. Chief hasn't written one. Of all the non-justice authored books, we have a minute. Which are the best about the court?
Oh my gosh, non-justice authored. Amul Thapar's book. He's a judge on the Sixth Circuit.
Sixth Circuit.
He's
Yep.
just wonderful, and his writing is so accessible. Oh my gosh, Stuart Banner's history of the Supreme Court is really dense, but you will learn a ton. Oh my gosh, I'm going to forget so many. I have a list in the back.
Amulthapar is a good one. That's a beautiful book because it talks about the people behind the cases and the people's justice. Let me close by saying, when you read the acknowledgments in Sarah's book, you're going to be stunned. They are left, right, center, up, down, short, tall, thin, and heavy. They are from every which way because everybody in the business likes Sarah. The book is, again, Last Branch Standing. Congratulations, Sarah Isker. I want to make sure you hear President Trump this morning in Maria Bartiromo, cut number 6.
I'm doing a great job for the country and for the world. You know, we've had no help, zero, from NATO. We're there for them. They're not there for us. We spend, you saw the chart that came out a couple of days ago, with a big monster red ball, that was us, and all these little satellite balls, and it represented the money spent on military and NATO, and it's ridiculous. And they should have been.
It's ridiculous. You cannot argue with the president. He is right. There's a lot of rethinking to be done about NATO. It got underway, as you heard me talk with Alex Gray earlier today. Let me also tell you, don't forget to rethink about your relief factor. Take it home with you. I should have suggested it to Sarah Isger. I think she is herself a runner. But relief factors for everyone, from anyone who's 20 to 90. It will make you feel better. I got my 6 miles in this morning. It's starting to get warm inside the Beltway, so I went out early. Ran into a retired general who is doing 100-yard sprints. I think 15 of them. I no longer do that stuff. I do long, slow distance. But I did get my 6 miles in, and I feel great because Relief Factor actually works. This package is $19.95. It's a 3-week starter pack. You can get it by calling 1-800, the number 4, and the word relief, 1-800-4-RELIEF. Or go right to their website, find the starter pack, $19.95, less than $1 a day for 3 weeks at relieffactor.com, relieffactor.com. Finally, I want to remind you about The Story of Everything, the new movie that is coming out on May 1, and actually April 30th, I think is when it starts. Visit thestoryoferything.film, thestoryoferything.film, thestoryoferything.film. Scientists talk about the fine-tuning of the universe. But what if it's more than just fine-tuning? What if it's a cosmic code, meticulously programmed? Consider this: the precise strength of gravity, the specific mass of a proton, the exact speed of light. Alter any of these by even a hair's breadth, and the universe as we know it, life itself, would not be possible. We're not talking about a lucky roll of the dice. We're talking about conditions so incredibly specific, so perfectly balanced, they defy the astronomical odds that they were random. Is it simply coincidence? No. Is there an underlying design? Well, Christians have believed that. For as long as Aristotle's been around, and Christians weren't around when Aristotle was around. That's certainly in Thomas Aquinas, and I certainly believe it. In theaters April 30th through May 6th on over 600 screens. Go and see The Story of Everything. Visit thestoryoferything.film for tickets and showtime. Shot in Dolby Visions with Dolby Atmos sound on a premium big screen experience to make sure you have the great one. Features over 400 VFX shots, a live orchestral scene. Includes scientists from Oxford, Rice, University of California, San Diego, Cambridge. This is a cinematic event that is meant to be experienced in theaters. Don't miss The Story of Everything.film, April 30th through May 6th in theaters across the United States. And don't miss Larry Elder coming up on the Salem News Channel. And don't miss me tomorrow.